Okay, my clock is reading 12 o'clock now, so I think we'll start there. I'd like to begin by welcoming you all. Thank you for joining us today. It's a rather dreary day in Edinburgh today, where myself and Mioara are right now. This has been the biggest sign-up we've ever had on one of our School for CEOs webinars, so I'm really pleased that this topic has piqued your interest, and I really hope that you come away from this webinar with some useful insights and hopefully some practical takeaways on what you can do, whether it's to support yourself or to help others in your organisation deal with imposter feelings. I'd like to run through a little bit of housekeeping, do a bit of a drum roll for our guest speaker, Mioara Cristea, before I hand over. And Mioara is going to present both the findings from our joint research as well as her own insights on the imposter phenomenon. And then we'll make sure that there's lots of time for questions at the end. So if you have any questions that you're holding on to, there will be plenty of opportunity to pose those, hopefully. So how to ask questions. If you wiggle your mouse, you should see along the bottom of your screen 3 options. So one of them is chat, one of them is raise hand, and the third one is the Q&A. The Q&A function is the best one to get me on. So by raising your hand, I'll see you, but I probably won't have time to help you or ask what your query is, your question is. But the Q&A, I will go through those and get through as many of those as I can at the end of the webinar, but you're welcome to ask your questions at any point during the presentation. Another point on that, your question, I appreciate imposter feeling is quite personal, so I won't be reading out who the questions come from. We also have some polls, which I really encourage you to engage with and to participate in. And those will be anonymized as well, so we won't see who's voting for what, just so that you're aware of that. Before I pass on to Mioara, I'd just like to do a brief introduction to the School for CEOs. Many of you who are logged on are familiar with us already, but for those of you who aren't, we are a School for CEOs, essentially. We were established 8 years ago now, with a view to supporting that generation of new CEOs as they transition into most senior leadership roles in organizations. We started with a program called The Vital Few, which is built around really practitioner-led and practical insights into what it's like to be in that lonely role and how you can prepare yourself to step into that position and succeed. And now we've developed a number of programs, the Alchemy Suite, where we support individuals as they transition in other leadership roles, both through open programs and in-house interventions as well. And our interest in imposter feeling came actually through our programs and through our coaching. So we've been experiencing a lot of executives who've talked about confidence and talked about the challenges, the personal challenges when they step into those roles and how they deal with those pressures. So there's a bit of a personal interest here in understanding imposter feeling, and we call it feeling very, very deliberately, and Mioara will talk a little bit about that in her presentation. But we're delighted to partner with Heriot University and with Dr. Mioara Cristea to deepen our understanding of how senior leaders are affected by imposter feeling, how prevalent is it among that leadership population, and also what helps them deal with those feelings, what helps them overcome it. So we wanted to do a piece of research that would be useful, not just informative. So without further ado, I'd like to pass on to our presenter for today. Dr. Mioara Cristea is the Program Director of the Masters in Business Psychology at Heriot University. She's originally from Romania, and she did her PhD in Romania. Following that, she had a postdoctoral position in University in Versailles in Paris, and now she's landed in Edinburgh, so extremely talented linguist, let alone psychologist. And I certainly find that every time I have a conversation with Mioara about this phenomenon, I learn something new. So I can't wait to find out what I'm going to learn today. And I hope you enjoy yourselves. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, pose them to me. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the session. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so very much for that very kind presentation, Gemma. Thank you very much, everyone, for making the time to come today and to share interest in our presentation, and particularly in the study that we've run together with the School for CEOs. People say that the majority of social scientists usually focus their research on topics that have personal value to them, or they have some specific personal interest in them. So in order to actually honor these assumptions, it seemed only fair that today you get to have an imposter in front of you speaking about the imposter feeling and giving you some background in terms of the research that different scientists have done in regard to this concept and how it can impact on people's personal but also on their professional life. So before I start providing you with some theoretical feedback, I would like to just address the elephant in the room. So pretty bluntly, I would like to ask you all if you feel like an imposter. So yes or no answer will do. And while I give you the time to answer that question, and I'll get back to Gemma later on to gather the information that you've provided, I would like to provide you those definitions that I've mentioned about. So in order for me to start, let's look a little bit about definitions and how do we define imposter syndrome or imposter phenomena. The first studies or the first research that was conducted in this area called it imposter syndrome or imposter phenomena. At least that's how Clance define this concept. As Emma suggested before, we try to move away from the imposter syndrome concept because syndrome per se leads people to believe that there's a medical problem or a medical issue, therefore something that needs to be addressed from a medical point of view. Therefore, we decided to use, for the purpose of the studies that we've ran, we decided to use imposter feeling as a concept rather than imposter syndrome. So in order to better understand the imposter syndrome or the imposter's feeling, I'd like to provide you with some definition or some information about what exactly does it mean to be an imposter or to feel like you're an imposter. So independently of what you call it, imposter syndrome or imposter feeling, the imposter feeling refers to basically a sort of a subjective and unfounded perception that people tend to have about their own intellectual inadequacy. That is some sort of internal experience of intellectual phoniness, we call it, and I like that concept, which basically translates into this idea that there's an illusion of incompetence. So people don't feel like they're smart enough. People don't feel like they have the intellectual skills or competences to be in a specific role, be it a professional role or sometimes a personal role. And because they don't feel like they're smart enough, they feel inadequate in specific context. Now, before we move forward with the presentation, I was wondering if Gemma could give us the results from our poll.
Here you go.
Oh, wow.
So just for the recording, for people listening afterwards who won't see this image, we've had 100% saying yes, they have felt like an imposter.
Yeah, so it's no surprise to me that 100% of the people in the listening to us said that they feel like an imposter. And it's not surprising to me because actually statistics say that at least 70% of all professionals, people working in different areas, experience at least once in their professional experience, in their jobs, one episode of either moderate, frequent, or high level of imposterism. So in fact, the bottom line here is that you're not really alone in this. There are quite a lot of people such as yourself, high achievers, well-qualified professionals that actually experience the imposter feeling. And only recently, we've seen that a lot of celebrities, for example, writers, politicians, and actors have come forward and they have mentioned publicly having experienced some episodes throughout their professional life of being an imposter or feeling like they are an imposter. So as you can see, you're not alone. And with that in mind, I can tell you that some of the research conducted in this area has tried to basically link the imposter feeling with different domains or different areas in which people are susceptible to experience imposter feeling. That is not to say that in other areas you don't experience it. It's just that so far the research has focused on these particular groups. And among those people experiencing IP or with whom IP has been linked, we have academics, we have software developers, we have marketing managers, we also have physician assistants. If you go into the research, you will notice that also high school and university students experience this feeling of being an imposter and so on. If you look at the different areas or the different domains, you see that there's no mention about leadership and how it connects to the imposter feeling, but there's also very little very little research looking at how executives, senior executives, or more specifically senior leaders experience or not the imposter feeling and how it impacts on their work. So with that in mind, Gemma from the School for CEOs contacted me a few months ago, and we decided to work together and conduct some research. And the research that we tried to do was aimed at addressing some main objectives, which were, first of all, to understand whether senior leaders do experience the imposter feeling, whether they feel like imposters or not, also how it affects the way they work and so on. But also we were very much interested in what are the strategies that they use, assuming that they feel like imposters, what kind of strategies they use, either positive or negative strategies that allow them to overcome this feeling, but also what strategies they use, not necessarily on themselves, but maybe that they use to provide guidance to some of their employees or other colleagues that might experience this imposter feeling. So these were the main aims of our research. And in order to get some answers to these questions and try to address these aims, we did two studies. The first of them was a quantitative study, which involved us running an online Qualtrics survey, which gave us the opportunity to actually identify the people who were experiencing imposter feelings, but also the different levels at which they were experiencing that. And we had 290 participants who had different types of professional status, but mainly they were senior executives. If you look at the graph on the slide, you can see some of the roles that these individuals had, and they were the age range was quite broad. So we had people who were as young as 24, which is quite surprising. Well, surprising in the sense that it's nice to see that we have leaders so young nowadays. So we had people ranging from ages of 24 all the way to 74. And we tried to have a balance in terms of gender, both males and females. Once participants answered to these questions to the online survey, we then identified a smaller group of people who had mentioned experiencing either a very low imposter feeling or a very high. And we then invited 20 people, equally divided between high and low imposter feeling, to actually run some individual interviews where we've asked several questions related to their experience with imposter feeling, the strategies that they use to overcome that, and so on. So if we look a little bit of the results from the first study, the qualitative one, we can see actually from the graph that 36% of the senior leaders actually are regularly subject to imposter feeling in the workplace. If we ignore that small 14% who say that they have low imposter feeling, you have 86% of participants in our study saying that, well, we do experience imposter feeling, and some of us, 6% for example, we experience it in a very high level, which means that the results that we received, the results that we got from this study, put senior leaders, senior executives within those groups of people among which the prevalence of the imposter feeling is quite high. So the results here add up to the previous research conducted in this area and the different categories of professionals that experience imposterism. So this was one of the first results that we got, which was quite important because it told us that, well, there is an imposter feeling among senior leaders. And then we moved on to better understand whether there's a prevalence or how that prevalence impacts men and women among those participants, but also whether age has an impact on experiencing imposter feeling as well. If we go back a little bit to the research suggests also that actually the imposter feeling is something that goes across genders. It is experienced by both men and women. The first studies conducted by clans quite a while ago, they actually associated the imposter syndrome, how it was called at that time, with women. So it was supposed to be something that only high achieving women would experience. But the more studies we ran looking at imposter feeling, the more we realized that actually it's not something that it's specific only to women, it's specific to both genders. And recent studies, such as the ones that I've referenced in the slides, suggest that there's no significant difference between men and women and the prevalence of experiencing the imposter feeling. So it doesn't really matter whether you're a female or a male, you do tend to, or you might experience imposter feelings at one point in your career. Moreover, the imposter feeling is also something experienced across culture. So there's no influence coming from cultural values or people in some cultures experiencing more of an imposter feeling than from others. There are actually, the studies suggest that in most cultures, high achieving professionals will experience imposter feeling. But some studies say that there are some groups in which this experience or this feeling is more prevalent. And those groups are the Black, Asian, and minority ethnic groups, which tend to experience it more than other groups like majority people, white people, etc. So with that in mind, we also tried to look at the distribution of imposter feeling across the sample that we had, and looking at obviously gender and age as two of the important variables that were measured within our study. And the results we got were a bit different than most of the recent results in that area. So if you look at the graph on gender, you can notice that women do tend to experience, at least the women in our study that were involved in this study, do tend to experience, or they do tend to express more imposterism as opposed to men, which is obviously not in line with some of the prior results. We did have some hypotheses. Gemma and I had lovely coffees and some interesting debates and discussions over why is it that we got these results. And some of the assumptions that we've made were related to the fact that usually women are more likely to express that than men. Women are more likely to actually be open about it and admit when they feel like an imposter, which is something that it might happen less frequent among men. That is to say that both might experience imposter feeling in the same way, but women tend to talk more about it as opposed to men. Another interesting hypothesis that we had was related to the idea of these professional traditional roles that some of them are more masculine and some of them are more feminine. So, for example, when we think about leaders, most of the times we associate a leader with a role that is traditionally masculine. So no wonder females in a position that is associated traditionally with males might tend to experience that a little bit more than men, purely because there's an expectation that women are not necessarily the group that are more likely to have those types of positions within different corporations and organizations. Interestingly enough, if you look at age, we can see that the younger you are, obviously you feel more like an imposter. The older you get, you feel less like an imposter, or at least you do tend to feel like an imposter, but the level is much lower. And one of the assumptions that we made here was related to experience. And in fact, quite a lot of the people that we interviewed afterwards talked about experience as being one of the factors that helped with dealing with imposter feelings. So the more you grow into an organization as a person, as a professional, the more you assume different roles, you get kind of comfortable in your role, you start to better understand what are your different skills and competences, so you're less likely to feel like you actually don't belong there, and so on. So that was a rather interesting result that we got.
Mioara, sorry, can I just bring up one thing? I've just had one question around the colours on the chart. If it's okay to just go back one slide just to clarify that. So you can see the colour on the left, the burgundy, yes, represents the low.
Yes.
So that's someone who scored in the low category. Then the grey is moderate. The
orange is frequent, and then the green is high.
Exactly. Thank you. I hope that answers that question. Sorry to interrupt.
No, it's fine. Okay, so I'm going to move forward and I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about what are the different traits that we have, or the traits that actually define this broader illusion of incompetence, which is the imposterism or the imposter feeling. So if you look at the research, there's a lot of traits that are mentioned, but some of the most frequent traits that are mentioned are related to self-doubt, perfectionism, need for social approval, and also inability to internalize success or achievement. So if you're an imposter, and we've seen that most of you have said that you feel like an imposter, you're more likely to doubt yourself in some situations, some professional situations. You're very much focused on perfectionism and doing things very properly. You're also very keen on having social approval, so there's this fear of being perceived as not competent from by your colleagues. And also there's an inability to actually admit that you're good at what you're doing, and that sometimes the outcomes, the positive outcomes that come from your work are actually because of the competence that you have. And I'm going to talk a little bit about each of these traits in more detail so that we all understand better how they link with imposter feeling, but also how they can have an impact in the workplace, and how it is important for organizations to recognize the consequences that feeling like an imposter may have, not just on the personal level, on the person that experiences that, but also on the organization as a whole. So if we start with self-doubt, self-doubt refers to this idea that, I doubt myself. So imagine yourself having to prepare a presentation in front of, let's say, 46 people. And those people are your colleagues in the department, and you have to pitch an important project that you would like to do. And remember those feelings that you have just minutes before you start the presentation, or an hour before you start the presentation. You kind of start panicking. You start realizing that, well, maybe this is not the best approach to this project. What if I fail? What if I don't do exactly what is expected of me? What if the others realize that actually I'm not really good at what I'm doing, and so on. So there's this idea that suddenly you start panicking as soon as you have to present in front of your colleagues, or you have to show make evidence of your own skills, you start doubting those particular skills. Now, I'd like you to tell me whether you feel self-doubt as a professional, and whether you've experienced that within your different roles within the organizations that you work for.
We'll just give another 5 seconds or so. People are pretty quick to respond to this one.
Yes.
Okay, I'll share results from here.
Great. So 56% have said yes sometimes, which is normal. You don't have to feel like an imposter to actually experience self-doubt. There are situations in which even people that don't necessarily feel like an imposter actually experience self-doubt. But if we look at the other answers, quite a lot, 44% say that we experience it a lot. So if you're within that category, it means that you tend to actually feel, most of the times when you are in situations where people might evaluate your competences, you tend to immediately start doubting your own competences. And actually, there's quite a lot, feeling this doubt about your own competences has a lot of impact on the way we do our work, the way we perceive ourselves, but also on the company itself. So there are some studies that show that there's a negative relationship between doubting yourself and self-efficacy. So if I doubt my competences, obviously I also doubt the fact that I'm competent or that I'm efficient at what I'm doing. And that in itself has an impact on occupational success. As in, if I start doubting myself before the presentation, I get a little bit anxious. I start feeling like maybe I'm not that efficient. Maybe the approach that I've taken with this presentation is not that efficient. Therefore, obviously, that's going to impact the way you do your presentation in front of your colleagues. And obviously, it becomes a vicious circle, because if your presentation might not be as good as you would have hoped for, or as good as you would have expected it to be, and then you start doubting yourself even more. So we can see how doubting yourself impacts on your efficacy, and therefore it has an impact on your success. It has been shown by different studies that many times self-doubt is also related to low professional expectations. So if I doubt myself, I'm more likely to have lower expectations when it comes to my profession. I won't aim for those big promotions or for those big roles in the company, because I doubt that I have the competences or that I'm good enough to actually get those jobs, for example. And also it shows that people who doubt themselves and who experience this feeling of being an imposter tend to choose what we call easily attainable goals. So instead of going for a big project that involves lots of interaction with your colleagues, that involves you going out of your comfort zone, you're more likely to go for smaller projects where you know that you stand a chance to actually achieve those goals. Because otherwise, putting yourself out of your comfort zone in most of the cases will just, reinforce that feeling of being an imposter, and the fright that you might be discovered by your colleagues or by your boss, for example. The second trait that I would like to mention is perfectionism. So if you're like me, you will probably have read your presentation 20 times. You will have gone through all the different little words, the expressions. You will have changed the font, rechanged the font, made sure that all the words were spelled properly, went back to the references, double-checked them, and so on. So in a lot of the cases, imposters perceive mistakes as incompetence. And because they perceive mistakes as incompetence, they tend to be very perfectionist. They have this excessive concern over mistakes, and they try to over-prepare in a lot of the situations in order to avoid potential mistakes that in most of the cases will just tell their colleagues that, well, you're not good enough for your job, you shouldn't be in this job, or at least that's what they think. Obviously, that's not necessarily the case. And there are some studies that show that because we have that fear of imperfection, we tend to use quite a lot of self-presentation strategies in order to try to present ourselves in a way that people don't find the imposter in us. And because we try to present ourselves in a specific manner, it seems that we're playing a role in most of the days when we interact with our colleagues for different tasks, for different activities, and so on, which leads me to the one concept that I really love about the imposter feeling, which is the lack of authenticity. So you will see that in a lot of the interviews that we've ran, and in a lot of the discussions that you have with imposters, a lot of the time they say, well, I'm playing this role. I'm playing the leader who's very confident, who's very good at what he does, who's showing everyone that he or she has a high self-esteem. But in fact, every time I do that, inside of me, I'm very, very scared that they're actually going to find out that that's just a role that I'm playing. So because of that, we tend to be very inauthentic. Well, we tend to portray ourselves in a specific way that leads to us lacking authenticity. And over time, we will see that being always constantly on a roll creates a lot of internal tension and can potentially have physical, psychological damage, and so on. Some other interesting, let's say, results about perfectionism and its link with imposter feeling are related to the outcomes of a specific task. So when it comes to adopting different behaviors, imposters will adopt those behaviors depending on whether they know that a potential positive outcome or a negative outcome will come from that particular behavior. And I hope I can make myself clearer by providing you an example. So let's say that I engage myself in doing a project, and I know for a fact that there's a chance of me not being able to deliver all the objectives in that particular project. So the successful outcome of me doing that project are not necessarily guaranteed. Then, and you will recognize probably some of the strategies because I know I've used them several times. And in this particular situations, there will be some strategies that I'm going to use or that imposters will use in their daily activities. First of all, procrastination. If you know that success is not guaranteed, you're more likely to procrastinate and do the tasks last minute. And I know I've done that quite a lot of the time. And there's also another strategy that we use, which is called self-handicap. So trying to find other activities to do so that we do things last moment and say, well, I had other emergent activities that needed to be done. Therefore, it was difficult for me to focus myself on this project. And this means that you find yourself excuses for which, well, the success was, well, you didn't have a successful outcome. When it comes to goals where you know that a successful outcome is guaranteed, we imposters tend to have other strategies. One of the strategies is to work very long hours and over-prepare ourselves. So instead of spending 1 hour preparing for the project, you might spend quite a lot of hours. Those hours might be over the schedule during the week. Sometimes some of us have found themselves working during the weekend. Also, you tend to over-prepare. So instead of spending 1 hour on a particular task, you tend to spend 2 hours, for example. Needless to say that that has an impact on your workload, but it also has an impact on the organization, because if you work longer hours, then obviously you get tired more, you are more likely to be subject of a burnout, and so on. If you over prepare, it means that instead of being able to commit to 3-4 tasks over the day, you can only commit to 2 or 3 tasks, which obviously has an impact on your activity, but also it might have an impact on the activities that you're doing together with other people within the organization. So therefore, like I said, there are personal level consequences like burnout, depression, exhaustion, but there are also organizational level consequences where people tend to lose a lot of time, resources, and energy when preparing for different tasks and different professional activities. Now, moving forward towards this, what we call external locus of control, or how do we attribute success? In social psychology, we have a lovely theory, which is called the self-serving bias theory. And you might not be familiar with the theory, but I'm pretty sure you have used it on several occasions, because this particular theory was developed by Heriot quite a while ago. And he was mentioning that, we have this natural tendency to attribute different causes for our behaviors. And naturally, we're inclined to attribute our successes in an internal way. So for example, if you get a promotion, you're more likely to say, I got the promotion because I was hardworking, because I put in the hours, because I am smart, because I'm good at what I do. And then we're also naturally inclined to attribute our failures to external stimuli or environmental factors. For example, if you didn't get the promotion, you're more likely to say, well, I had other activities that were a priority for me. For example, my family, my mother was sick, so I had to attend to her. My boss doesn't really like me, so he didn't really support that promotion, and so on. So we have that natural tendency to make internal attributions when it comes to our success, and external attributions when it comes to failure, which is natural and which is normal, because it allows us to boost our self-worth and our self-esteem. When it comes to people who feel like an imposter, that doesn't really work this particular way, because the tendency here is to make external attribution for our success. So when you do get that promotion, or when you do win that grant, that project that you've been working for, instead of saying, I'm actually good at this, most of the people say it was luck, or they will say, well, I did have something to do with it, but it was, an effort, a team effort. So it wasn't really just me, it was the whole team. So we have a hard time actually internalizing success and achievement. And that has an impact on our self-esteem, because instead of boosting it, it makes it go lower. And that in itself has a connection with self-worth, with self-doubt, and so on, which, creates kind of a vicious circle, obviously. Now, moving on to the last of the traits that I wanted to talk to you is what we call need for social approval. Once again, I'm going to quote some social psychologists, and I'm going to talk about social comparison. In every day, in all the activities that we do on a personal, professional level, we tend to compare ourselves with others. And that's a normal thing that all humans do. And that helps us actually understand better our position within our social groups, within society, within our organization. Basically, the others become a mirror of our own traits, skills, capabilities, and so on. So we tend to do that type of comparison. And we will see that when it comes to imposters, the research suggests that actually imposters tend to do a constant comparison with other significant others' skills. So you will find yourself always comparing yourself with people with whom you're working, who have more or less similar jobs as you do. And not just that you're constantly comparing yourself, but also there's this perception of them being always brilliant, of always doing really great, of having these amazing ideas based on their skills, and you not feeling like you're an equal partner in this in these situations. And that in itself has an impact. Like I said, comparing yourself to others, it's good because it boosts our self-esteem. But when it becomes a constant comparison and when it leads you to feeling always unequal to the others, it has consequences on a personal level, but also on an institutional level. First of all, what we've noticed in research is that if you're an imposter, you will avoid evaluative situations. So think about the fact that this Friday you have to hand in a report on some activities that you've done to your boss. And while talking about this particular this report that you need to do Monday with a colleague, this nice colleague with whom you're constantly comparing tells you, well, if you want, I can have a look at the report before you send it to your boss. And you smile politely, you say, yes, of course. But then you find yourself kind of avoiding this particular person throughout the whole week, handing in the draft and then meeting them next week and say, well, actually, I've had so much work to do. I completely did the report last minute, so it was difficult for me to actually send it to you. That's what I mean by avoiding evaluative situations. By sending the draft to your colleague with whom you're constantly comparing yourself and you're feeling unequal, you would put yourself in a situation where they would potentially discover you as an imposter. Therefore, you tend to avoid that particular situation. Also, because of this constant comparison to others, imposters also tend to keep a very low profile within the company. So they're less likely to take on citizenship behaviors, for example, or tasks that are sometimes out of their comfort zone, because once again, that would mean that they have to put themselves out there and they might be discovered by others. And one last consequence relates to the fact that they might tend to take jobs below their skill set. Because if you're taking a job that is below your set of skills, then obviously you're very likely to excel at it. And obviously it's more difficult for others to identify you as a fraud or as an imposter. Moving on to our study. When we did the interviews with those 20 participants, 10 with low IF and 10 with high IF, we actually asked people what are the traits or the feelings that they experience as imposters when they interact with their colleagues in their day-to-day professional activities and so on. And you can see from some of the results that I've put, some of the quotes that I've mentioned, and some of the things that I've put on this slide, that most of these, well, the main traits that they've expressed were related to self-doubt, this idea that I'm not good enough, I shouldn't be in this role actually, and that self-doubt is afterwards connected to or associated with different types of emotions, being very anxious, feeling very isolated, because if you don't feel good enough, then there's a tendency to keep a low profile, to isolate yourself from the others and so on. But they've also mentioned quite extreme, in some cases, physical impacts that feeling like an imposter have, which are related to, sometimes tears, sometimes crying, struggling to speak, which then, like I said before, it can lead to more serious psychological problems like burnout and exhaustion, depression, and so on. Another thing that was very interesting to notice is that basically everything that, well, some of the things that our participants mentioned kind of reinforced what we already got from the research, and that's very important. One of the things that they mentioned was the idea of lack of authenticity. And if you compare the two groups, the ones that experience high levels with the ones that experience low levels, you can immediately spot the difference. So high high imposters, let's call them that way, feel like they're not authentic, like they're always constantly playing a role among when interacting with their employees, with the staff that they are in charge of. Whereas people who experience a low level of imposterism, they feel very authentic. They feel very comfortable in their own skin. They feel like they can express vulnerability if they have to in front of their team, and that's mainly because they feel like they can trust their team. There's also that difference in terms of confidence. We've mentioned the self-doubt. There's a lack of self-confidence when it comes to people experiencing high level of imposterism. So if I doubt myself, then there's less confidence. Whereas people experiencing less imposterism, they feel like they can, they are very confident. And that's something we can see from research relates very much to societal expectations, but it's also related to the way we were brought up. There was one participant in particular that said something, and Gemma will correct me if I'm wrong, something in the lines of, actually, I was brought up this way, to be confident, to trust myself, to try to challenge everyone, or to challenge myself by getting engaged in different activities. And that in itself created a lot of confidence for me. So yeah, no, I don't really feel like an imposter. Some other traits that were mentioned was the idea of perfectionism, and our participants were very focused, or they mentioned quite clearly this idea of feeling like, if I do a mistake, then people will think I'm incompetent. Any mistake is always associated, rather than just being a mistake, because everyone can make a mistake at one point. Instead of believing that that's just normal and that's the way things go, well, with this particular group, making a mistake equals being an incompetent, being found out as an imposter, potentially being kicked out of the job that I'm doing. And finally, this idea of self-doubt. On the other hand, if we look at the low imposter feeling, a lot of them talked about experience. And I think that was very much related to some of them being quite old, or, well, not, let's just not use the word old, but actually having quite a lot of experience within the role that they were performing as senior executives. And that ties in a lot with the age graph that I mentioned to you at the beginning. So basically, the more you do the job that you're doing, the more you challenge yourself to interact with your employees, with the staff that you have under you, the more you find yourself in situations where you have to commit to different activities, the more likely you are to acquire a specific experience and acquire some strategies that allow you to deal with any sort of experience that you might have in terms of being an imposter. Therefore, being experienced plays an important role in diminishing or experiencing a lower level of imposterism. Now, moving on to very briefly some consequences.
Mioara,
yes,
I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm conscious of time, so I wonder, do you think we could move on to the coping strategies and the recommendations, and then perhaps if there's opportunity to pick up on the consequences in the questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So when we looked at the coping strategies that our participants used, or the ones that, let's just say the positive coping strategies, the one that they use, a lot of the times they were talking about self-reflection, about this idea that we need to take a step back and think about the context, redefining the situation, analyzing the emotions that we have, and why is it that we experience those particular emotions. They mentioned stuff like coaching, being mentored, or having the possibility to discuss those emotional experience that they have with people from other groups, talking to others, and also this idea that you need to physically and mentally be quite fit. So a lot of the participants talked about going to the gym, for example, doing meditation, having a sort of a very clean and also very healthy lifestyle, which always improves on sleeping patterns and eating behaviors and so on, and has an impact on the overall mood that they've experienced. So basically, some of the advice that we've gathered from their responses and the advice that we would give people who experience a high level of impostorism are related to talking to others. It is always important to break the silence and make sure we share those experiences with others. It's difficult to tell people, well, I feel like, particularly when you're a senior leader, I feel like an imposter. I don't feel like I'm good at my job, because you are the leader. People expect you to lead them. So it's not easy to come forward and show that you are vulnerable and that you have doubts about your own competences. However, research has suggested, and our participants have suggested as well, that breaking that silence, talking to other people, can have a cathartic effect on people, and it would allow you to be more prepared to deal with those particular feelings. Another strong advice would be self-reflection. Just like I mentioned before, try to separate feelings from facts, and also recognize moments when you should feel fraudulent, you should feel like a fraud, and also moments when actually you shouldn't feel like that, because you are not an imposter, you belong there. It's just that sometimes you have those moments of doubt. Some of the studies here mentioned, some of the previous studies mentioned as a good strategy for self-reflection, keeping a diary, identifying all those moments when you feel like an imposter. See what exactly triggered you feeling like an imposter. What can you do to change or redefine the situation, and so forth. Change yourself, adopt new rules, adopt new ways of seeing things. If you reframe the situation, then you're more likely to experience different, more positive emotions as well. Try to see failure as an opportunity. We've seen that with imposters, any mistake is perceived in a very fatalistic type of idea, where if I make a mistake, if I fail at something, then that's the end of everything. I can lose my job. Actually, some of the low imposters, some of the participants experiencing low imposterism said, actually, well, failure is an opportunity for us to learn, to challenge ourselves, to just develop new responses and new reactions. And those failures teach us about the competences and the skills that we have and how we can improve ourselves. So instead of seeing it as a failure, we need to see it as an opportunity. Embrace success. Sometimes it's actually good to say, I'm good at what I do, rather than say, well, it's a team effort or it was pure luck. Yes, sometimes it's about the others, but in some cases, it's about us. So it's good to embrace that success and accept the fact that we do have the skills required for us to do a particular job. Build networks, that's very important. Surround yourself with good teams. Try to develop networks based on trust and being able to share those different feelings that you might have with the people within your network. And finally, as cheesy and as cliche as it might sound, take it until you make it. You don't have to wait until you're confident enough to challenge yourself to do something. Sometimes by changing your behavior, you push yourself, and then you can change your confidence as well. And those are the main advice that we can provide you in terms of overcoming imposter feelings that you might experience. And more details are provided in the report that I'm pretty sure Gemma has made available to most of the participants.
Thank you very much, Mioara. If you'd just like to advance onto the final slide. There have been some questions coming in.
Yes.
And but actually first there's a comment that I'd like to share from a member of the audience, which is the key word here seems to me to be authenticity. None of us are good at everything. All of us are good at several things, or else we would never have got to CEO. And this is a comment from a chief executive. he says, by taking oneself back to that place internally where one feels authentic seems to me to be a good coping strategy. Is that a good, healthy, sustainable solution?
That is a very good suggestion. And we've had participants mentioning exactly that particular strategy as being a successful one. The problem here is that by playing a role all the time, you get very tense. Our mood tends to become more negative. The self-doubt creeps in, and you kind of feel like you're always playing a part. So you're no longer authentic with yourself, but also with the others. And by doing that, there's no more trust with the others. I think the main thing here is that by not being authentic, we lose the trust. We lose those strong, meaningful relationships with our staff, with our colleagues, and we can only gain the trust and the meaningful relations by actually showing that, yes, we are vulnerable sometimes, and being authentic with our colleagues sometimes means in most of the cases that they need to see that we are humans too, that we make mistakes, that we are vulnerable, that there will be situations in which we might make the wrong decision, and that can happen. It will have an impact, but then there will also be situations where we do make the good decisions, and that those decisions will move the company forward.
Thank you. There was a question that came in quite early on that I'd like to come back to, which is, and he did say you might come to this, but it's a question around studies that cover the effects of imposter feeling on organizational culture and organizational performance. And I think that we've referenced, or I've referenced some interesting factors in terms of effects on performance. Perfectionism and the opportunity for wasted time being one of them, low job satisfaction and employee turnover, particularly if people are underselling themselves when it comes to progressing their careers and assuming those leadership roles. What are your thoughts on culture? Because I think for me, the implication of trust that you've just talked about and the impact that might have if you're trying to develop a collaborative culture, say if you're not confident and trusting enough of your colleagues to be able to share and bring them in for support, what kind of damaging impact that might have?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that organizational culture is a very important key factor in people feeling or not like an imposter and the way they approach those feelings. I believe that obviously the more positive organizational culture, the more, there's a culture of people understanding that mistakes can be done, that failures are opportunities for us to excel at what we do, at identifying the things that we are good at and the things that maybe we need to improve on. That kind of culture obviously encourages people to become better and to feel less like an imposter. Now, there are some studies in social psychology applied in organizational context that suggest that unfortunately, one of the negative consequences or one of the approaches that may have an impact on people feeling even more like imposters in some situations is the way organizations treat mistakes. So some studies suggest that in many situations when an employee makes a mistake, we tend to believe that it is the employee's fault, and we tend to put in place rules to avoid other employees making the same mistake. That kind of approach tends to create a sort of negative culture around the way we see mistakes. Instead of seeing them as opportunities to grow, we tend to see them as something negative, obviously, and that mistakes are not encouraged, obviously, but also mistakes are punishable. So putting in place a lot of policies in order to avoid other employees making the same mistake kind of tells us, well, this is punishable. First of all, because we make public the fact that somebody made that mistake, and then we put in place new policies so that those other potential employees do not make the same mistakes. And that type of culture creates a distrust among employees, but also creates more expectation of, I don't have to make a mistake, because if I make mistakes, then that will have an impact on the competences that I have and the way I am perceived by the company. And there were some very interesting studies that try to link that with internal external attributions. And it's really interesting because once again, when employees tend to make mistakes, and they asked leaders to evaluate or to try to put a cause on why is it or what led those employees to make those mistakes. It was very interesting because once again, when we fail to do something, the organizations or the leaders in this particular context tend to make internal attributions. It's our employees' fault that they've made this mistake. Whereas the way it should be treated is that obviously there's a individual factor there, but there's also environmental factors, external factors, and we are supposed to also look at the external factors when trying to identify why the mistake was made and so forth. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. I'm very conscious of time. That was the 1 o'clock gun that just sounded in the background. Apologies for that. And there are a couple of questions. But Mioara, are you happy for me to share your email contact details afterwards? Because there are a couple of questions that I haven't had a chance to read out. So to those people who have asked those questions, please do get in touch with them afterwards. It's been really interesting for me, so thank you very much, Mioara, and thank you everyone for joining us and actually for staying on the line, even though we've run over a little. I'm conscious that almost everyone who registered asked to join our mailing list, so I will be sharing details with you of our upcoming webinar on the 10th of January, which is with Jeremy Snape from Sporting Edge. And this will be a really interesting topic, which will actually tie in neatly with some of the things we've discussed today around imposter feeling. The subject of that webinar is a winning mindset. And Jeremy takes a sporting lens, or he looks at it through a sporting lens. So he's an international cricketer and coach. And he has interviewed a wide range of successful leaders in sport, in the performing arts, and also in academia. And he's brought all those insights together to try and get inside the head of what makes us successful. So he'll be really getting inside their minds and sharing what he's learned with us on the 10th of January, which will be really interesting. Mioara mentioned our research, and I'll make sure that you have a link to the research if you haven't had a chance to have a look at it already. And I hope you find that helpful as you help others in your organisation, but also as you help yourselves develop that confidence to reach and keep developing your full potential. We haven't had a chance to talk about gender, and I know that that's an interesting subject for a lot of those who joined us today, particularly the conversation around gender roles in the workplace. And I will be interviewing an evolutionary biologist later on today, actually, for my December podcast. And we're going to be looking at role modeling and how our gender roles have developed in society, and actually how changing those roles can take place, and how organizations can support that in order to create more inclusive and diverse organizations. So I think that's going to be a really interesting conversation, and I will definitely share the details of that conversation with you after as well. All that it leaves me to do is thank you, everyone. We've overrun massively, and you're all still here, so thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you found that useful. And Mioara, it's been an absolute pleasure collaborating with you on this research, and I hope that we'll be working together and developing this partnership over the time, because it's been wonderful. So thank you for today, and thank you for everything.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Goodbye, and have a lovely weekend.